The mountains outside Kabul. As we drove south down the Logar road towards the Pakistan border, we met the first convoys of Soviet troops pulling out, withdrawing north towards the Afghan capital, eventually heading for the Soviet Union. The conscripts are dirt-encrusted and battle-weary. They've left behind Soviet colleagues and Afghan troops fighting fiercely to keep the road open and hold military positions. For once, the Soviet troops wave at a foreign television crew instead of pointing their guns, the driver distracted by our presence. Where have they just come from? Where have you just come from? The crew of this armoured personnel carrier told me they'd come from a village on the road to the town of Khost, which is said once again to be under siege by the Mujahideen. For 8 years, there's been an official news blackout on military details. Now these enormous columns of hardware confirm the massive scale of the Red Army's commitment to fighting the Mujahideen. Not just the array of weaponry, also the vast military infrastructure needed for bases. These Soviet troops are coming back from battle outside Kabul, and they're returning with equipment which has been out there for many months. The question now is how effective the Afghan defense forces will be without these Soviet troops. As the Soviets go, the Afghan forces are being beefed up. To win a guerrilla war, Mr. Gorbachev and the Kremlin now realize Soviet troops could never win. These are new recruits at an Afghan army training camp. Conscription is being intensified, helped by press gangs, and reservists are being called up. The Afghan president, Najibullah, has said publicly his regime's survival depends on strengthening the armed forces. Last month's Geneva agreement made no mention of a ceasefire, and now the Soviets are leaving, the focus of Mujahideen attacks will shift from the Red Army to the Afghan army. Many Western analysts paint a picture of ragtag, ill-disciplined, badly qualified Afghan forces will be wiped out in weeks by sustained guerrilla attacks. Certainly few Afghan troops look like the Soviet Union's crack, battle-disciplined soldiers. But officers at this military academy seemed remarkably relaxed, betraying no detectable sense of fear for the future. The head of the ruling party's Armed Forces Department has no doubt his forces are strong enough.
Sitting in the West, they are judging about Afghanistan, but we know about the real situation of Afghanistan, whether we can defend or not, but we are sure that we can defend.
How worried are you about the departure of the Soviet troops? Do you worry that this weakens your ability to defend Afghanistan?
Not at all. No, nothing, not at all, no concern.
But the general admitted that the high number of conscripts is a major problem. During the war, sizable numbers of conscripts are reported to have defected to the Mujahideen. More volunteers like these, just arrived for training, would provide a more reliable, disciplined force. Recently, the Defense Ministry has improved living and service conditions in an effort to boost morale and loyalty. Every serving soldier below the rank of colonel has been promoted one rank in order to raise the level of pay and fringe benefits. But in the end, the key question will be the level of Soviet influence. Until now, all soldiers have been taught the importance of Soviet friendship, but we were told that does not extend to teaching Marxist-Leninist ideology. Although we didn't see any, Soviet military advisors are said to supervise closely every facet of the Afghan military. The brigadier in charge of this training camp told me no Soviet advisors are based here. He said they aren't needed, although they do occasionally pay visits. But the Afghan forces will still be significantly reinforced by the continuing presence of Soviet military advisors after the troops go.
Before the revolution, there were advisors, and there is need for the learning of their science for our forces. and we have to know about the specification of the arms. It means they have to educate and train our officers and armed forces.
Yet, however influential Soviet advisors remain in Kabul, there is ominous evidence of serious problems which Moscow won't be able to solve. These are cadets of the Sarandoi Police, a military force run not by the Defense Ministry but by the Interior Ministry. Sarandoi cadets received part of their training in the Soviet Union. In the past, professional and tribal rivalries have led to the Sarandoi and army fighting each other instead of the Mujahideen, rivalries which could be exacerbated once the Soviet troops leave. Another matter which must concern Moscow is that while Afghan forces control the visible security in Kabul by day, at night it's still Soviet tanks and armor which patrol the streets and guard key intersections. One therefore has to ask how secure Kabul will be once all the Soviet tanks have finally gone. The regime believe Kabul is secure, and 10 miles outside the capital, Afghans happily relax on the outer edge of the security zone. Here in the hills there's a ring of steel designed to stop the ravages of war reaching Kabul. But beyond the lake, control of the valley and mountains swings between the government and the Mujahideen, putting the guerrillas within bombing and rocket range of Kabul. Increasingly, the relative normality of life in the capital is interrupted by car bombs and rockets apparently designed more to scare people than to hit specific targets. This bomb was planted in a truck and exploded in a busy car park, killing 6 people and injuring 49. But within minutes, life returned to normal, despite talk of a second device. Bombs failed to unsettle a population hardened to war. These are casualties from one attack. The government is quick to blame counter-revolutionary extremists, the Mujahideen, but in some incidents suspicion falls on competing tribal factions within the government. With Afghan forces already withdrawing or being driven out of outposts near the Pakistan border, the Mujahideen, backed by the West, believe it's just a matter of time before the Kabul government loses control of large swathes of rural Afghanistan and perhaps several cities. President Najibullah defiantly told a press conference during our visit that the whole of Afghanistan is under government control, and there isn't a single area which cannot defend itself. But what seemed a franker, more realistic assessment came from a deputy prime minister.
In all Afghan history, that the government didn't have fully control the rural areas, which we do not claim that we can control those areas right now or in the futures. Even the Mujahideen, if they come, also they cannot control because the area is too vast.
But despite regular heavy shelling of Mujahideen strongholds, the guerrillas have consistently proved in the country areas their deadly ability to harass and cut the extended supply lines which radiate from Kabul, supplying everything from fuel and ammunition to food. Until now, these supply lines have enabled the regime to keep control of the main cities and dominant positions like this missile battery. The Afghans will now take over Soviet bases and some hardware, although it's not clear how much. But the guerrillas believe they'll eventually overrun what the Soviets leave behind. It is here in the mountains outside Kabul that the effectiveness of the Afghan defense forces and the political strength of the Najibullah regime will be put to the test. The Mujahideen say they are determined to control areas like these for eventual assaults on the Afghan capital itself. The response of the Kabul government is to construct several layers of defense. These advanced Soviet-built Mi-24 helicopter gunships have already shown their lethal ability to track and destroy Mujahideen units in the hills. The main guerrilla countermeasure is the American Stinger missile. In villages, the government has established a network of militia gunmen and informers by buying the loyalty of tribal elders. And on the edge of cities like here at the Jalalabad Gorge, there are stringent security checks. This breathtaking valley is the only road route into Kabul from Pakistan. Each day, 2,000 heavily laden trucks clog the road, driving to and from Pakistan, carrying goods and people, even though Afghanistan and Pakistan remain in a state of undeclared war. Each vehicle is methodically searched for secret caches of weapons and explosives. With Soviet and Afghan armor often pinning down the Mujahideen well outside Kabul, this is one of the few routes guerrillas can use to infiltrate the capital. We were told the document checks of every driver and passenger led to 2 or 3 suspected guerrillas being arrested each day. They come from Pakistan with forged papers. And the Sarandoi commander told me an array of bomb materials and weapons was regularly confiscated here. So what now for the war in Afghanistan? A United Nations delegation headed by a Finnish Major General has now arrived in Kabul. The 10-nation monitoring force of 50 officers has the seemingly impossible job of assisting both Afghanistan and Pakistan to enforce the Geneva Agreement. But specifically, it has no peacekeeping or supervisory role.
Our responsibility is to provide them assistance, advice. They can take it or not take it. That's their prerogative, of course, Therefore, there is no question of public sanctions. We are not here as judges. We are here solely as international civil servants. Some of us happen to be military officers, to assist the 2 governments concerned to resolve any difficulties or misunderstandings which may arise.
There are likely to be few misunderstandings over the Soviet withdrawal itself. The difficult task for the UN will be checking whether the 2 superpowers continue to supply arms to the Mujahideen or Afghan government in violation of the Geneva Agreement. Meanwhile, Soviet hardware is building up at collecting points around Kabul, ready to be flown home, or for the long drive north up the Salang Pass and over the Hindu Kush mountains. The armed Soviet supply convoys still arriving in Kabul this week underline that the journey up the Salang remains prone to guerrilla attack. Last Friday, Soviet television's correspondent in Kabul, Mikhail Lyshinsky, was with a convoy carrying Soviet journalists, ambushed just north of Kabul on the Salang. An armored personnel carrier overturned, killing a correspondent for the newspaper Izvestia and seriously injuring another. The same day, Lyshinsky told me the journalist's death showed how the withdrawing troops still face great danger from mines and ambushes. He said the Kremlin has confidence in Najibullah, but is worried about the future. As for the Soviet troops...
They're happy, happy. Finish war, the meeting with their families, wives, their children. Meeting with our homeland. Happy.
Do you believe there will be peace here once the Soviet troops have gone?
Everything will be good.
You believe there will be
yes,
peace here?
Yes, I believe. Yes, of course. I believe.
We will never forget these Afghan veterans sing on what's become a best-selling Russian record. We've been through so much together, they sing, that when we leave, we won't be able to hold back our tears. Mr. Gorbachev believes President Brezhnev's intervention in Afghanistan is being ended with honor. The Red Army failed to win this war, but it hasn't been defeated either. But as the troops start to go, the Kremlin has now begun a new era of increased influence in Afghanistan.